I used to think advice was something young people ignored and old people gave because they had nothing left to lose. Now I understand something I didn't back then. Advice isn't about control. It's about regret. If I could talk to my 25-year-old self, I wouldn't try to impress him. I wouldn't lecture him. I wouldn't try to scare him. I'd just tell him the truth. The kind of truth you only earn after time has taken things from you that you can never get back. My name is John. I'm 70 years old. I've lived long enough to see how fast life moves. Once you stop measuring it in years and start measuring it in losses. I've watched time take things quietly, without drama, without asking for permission. And I've learned that the most dangerous moments in life aren't the loud ones. They're the quiet ones, when you believe you still have plenty of time to fix things later. When I was 25, I believed I was early. Early in my career, early in my life, early enough to make mistakes and still recover. I thought urgency was for people who had fallen behind, and I was certain that I hadn't. I felt ahead simply because I was young. I believed time was generous, forgiving, patient. I assumed it would wait for me to feel ready. That assumption shaped nearly every decision I made, and I didn't realize it at the time, but it was already costing me. At 25, I didn't feel reckless. I felt reasonable. I delayed things calmly, without panic or guilt. I delayed taking care of my health because my body felt strong. I delayed committing to relationships because I believed people would always be there. I delayed pursuing meaningful work because stability felt safer. I told myself I was being practical, responsible, realistic. What I didn't see was that I was trading long-term fulfillment for short-term comfort, and time was quietly keeping track. Nothing in life collapses all at once. That's the lie we believe when we think we'll notice when things start going wrong. The truth is, life erodes. It wears down through small delays, small compromises, and small decisions that feel harmless in the moment. At 25, I thought waiting was neutral. I didn't understand that waiting always has a direction, and that direction is almost never forward. If I could sit across from my 25-year-old self today, the first thing I would tell him is that he is not as early as he thinks he is. Life doesn't pause while you gather clarity. It moves while you hesitate. Time doesn't wait for certainty. It responds only to action. I spent years believing that thinking about change was the same as moving toward it. It isn't. Reflection without action is just another form of delay. I remember my body at 25. It felt reliable, forgiving. I could ignore sleep, eat poorly, skip exercise, and still wake up feeling fine. Pain came and went quickly. Fatigue didn't linger. I mistook that resilience for permanence. I told myself I would start taking care of my health when it started to matter. What no one told me was that health always matters, especially when it's quiet. At 70, my body speaks whether I listen or not. My knees carry the memory of years I didn't respect them. My back holds the weight of every tomorrow I believed in. The pain didn't arrive suddenly. It arrived gradually. Through neglect, through avoidance, through the assumption that youth was a shield instead of a loan. If I could speak to my younger self now, I would tell him that the body keeps score even when you pretend not to notice. By the time pain forces you to listen, the conversation is no longer negotiable. I would also tell my younger self to stop assuming that the people he loves will always be available. At 25, relationships felt permanent simply because they were familiar. I treated friendships like background music, always there, easy to ignore. I postponed calls. I skipped visits. I assumed there would always be another holiday, another birthday, another chance to reconnect. Slowly, without conflict or explanation, people drifted. Parents aged while I was busy building a life I thought would eventually make them proud. One day, I realized how many conversations I had postponed until there were no more opportunities to have them. Loss doesn't always arrive as tragedy. Sometimes it arrives as absence, as silence, as a phone that no longer rings. Regret doesn't come from what you did wrong nearly as much as it comes from what you never did at all. The risks you avoided, the words you withheld, the presence you postponed. Those are the things that stay with you when time runs out. At 25, I was deeply committed to comfort. I didn't call it that back then. I called it stability. I wanted a steady paycheck, predictable routines, and minimal disruption. I believed safety was maturity. I believed discomfort was unnecessary. What I didn't understand was that comfort doesn't protect you. It slowly traps you. It builds routines that feel secure but quietly shrink your world. I stayed in a job that paid the bills but drained my spirit because leaving felt risky. Years passed without me noticing. Promotions came. So did a growing sense of emptiness that I didn't know how to name. Every year, I told myself I would change direction soon. Soon became 5 years, then 10, then 15. One morning, standing in front of a mirror, I barely recognized the man looking back at me. He looked successful on paper, but exhausted inside. If I could talk to my younger self, I would tell him not to confuse security with fulfillment. They are not the same thing, and choosing the wrong one for too long costs more than yo. There's another truth I wish I had understood at 25, and it's one people rarely talk about honestly. I believed life would slow down at some point, that there would be a season when the pressure eased and I'd finally have the space to think clearly. That moment never came. Life doesn't slow down for clarity. It accelerates with responsibility. Each year adds more obligations, more expectations, and more reasons to postpone what matters most. The longer I waited, the harder it became to choose differently, because my life slowly grew around the decisions I had already made. At 25, I thought I could always reinvent myself later, that identity was flexible and change was reversible. What I didn't understand was how repetition shapes who you become. You don't wake up one day as a stranger to yourself. You practice being someone every day until that version feels permanent. The habits you repeat, the environments you tolerate, and the compromises you accept quietly lock you into a life that becomes harder to escape with each passing year. By the time I realized how far I had drifted from who I wanted to be, returning felt overwhelming. I also underestimated how quickly opportunities expire. At 25, everything felt open-ended, as if doors never really closed. I assumed if I didn't take a chance now, I could take it later. But timing matters as much as talent. There are seasons in life when risks are lighter, mistakes are more forgiving, and recovery is easier. I spent those seasons hesitating. Later, when I finally felt ready, the cost of risk was higher and the margin for error was thinner. There's a particular exhaustion that comes from living a life slightly misaligned with who you are. It doesn't announce itself dramatically. It shows up as low-level dissatisfaction, constant distraction, and the quiet feeling that something is missing even when everything looks fine. I lived with that feeling for years, telling myself it was normal, that fulfillment was overrated. It wasn't until much later that I realized I had been ignoring my own inner signals, the quiet nudges urging me to adjust course instead of postponing the life I actually wanted. If I could talk to my younger self, I would tell him to respect those signals. Discomfort isn't always a problem to eliminate. Sometimes it's information. Ignoring it doesn't make it disappear. It just makes it louder later, when change costs more and time feels heavier. I would also tell him to stop measuring his life against other people's timelines. Comparison quietly pushes you toward choices that look impressive but feel empty. A meaningful life isn't built by keeping pace with others. It's built by staying aligned with yourself. And alignment requires honesty, the kind most people avoid because it demands uncomfortable decisions. Money was another lesson I misunderstood early in life. At 25, I believed earning more would fix everything. I believed saving could wait. I believed bad habits would somehow correct themselves with time. They don't. Money isn't about intelligence or luck. It's about respect. And respect learned late is expensive. I spent years using money to numb dissatisfaction, buying convenience instead of freedom, comfort instead of control. Later in life, I paid for those decisions with stress, limitation, and regret. If I could speak to my younger self now, I would tell him to learn discipline before life forces it on him. Voluntary discipline feels light. Forced discipline feels heavy. One gives you choices. The other takes them away. The earlier you understand this, the more control you retain over your future. Love was another area where time taught me lessons I wish I had learned sooner. At 25, I believed love was automatic. I thought feelings were enough. I assumed effort could come later, after life slowed down. I avoided difficult conversations. I postponed emotional growth. I assumed patience would compensate for immaturity. It doesn't. Love requires presence, attention, action. Relationships don't break all at once. They fade through neglect, through silence, through the belief that there will always be time to fix what you ignore. One of the hardest things to accept as you get older is how quickly time accelerates. At 25, a year felt long. At 40, it felt fast. At 70, it feels like a blink. Weeks disappear. Years collapse. That's why waiting is dangerous. When you keep telling yourself you'll start next year, life quietly takes 10 from you without warning. If I could speak directly to my younger self, without metaphor or poetry, I would tell him to take care of his body before it asks him to call the people he loves while they can still answer, to save money like his future depends on it, because it does, to leave environments that shrink his spirit, to stop waiting to feel ready, because readiness is a myth, to act while fear is still manageable, before it grows into regret. At 70, I don't wish I had been smarter. I wish I had been braver sooner. I wish I had understood that life rewards action, not intention. The years don't respond to plans. They respond to movement. You don't need to be perfect to begin. You just need to be honest about what you're avoiding. If you're listening to this and thinking you still have time, you're right. But you have less than you think, and more than enough to start. Time is not your enemy, but it is not your friend either. It simply moves forward, taking whatever you choose not to protect. So if you take one thing from John's story, let it be this. Don't wait for urgency to teach you what wisdom already knows. Start now. Not perfectly, not fearlessly, just intentionally. Because one day you'll be 70, and you'll either thank yourself for the things you did early, or regret the moments you kept postponing. Time is ticking. It always has been. And now, what you do with it is up to you.